Welcome to Sab's podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina I am here at Lee Fort Terrace in Salem, Massachusetts, where tenants have been given a 120-day notice that they need to vacate the premises. This is public housing that is going to be privatized, and I'm going to interview a couple of residents here and explain also the environmental impacts of rebuilding this area and what's going to come down the line. All right, I am here with Gabe. He's an organizer for United Front Against Displacement. Gabe, thank you so much for coming out. So, how did you hear about this issue going on here in Salem, Massachusetts?
Yeah, so I mean, basically we've been organizing for a while in the city of Boston around the public housing that was being privatized there, and I actually saw a news report of some of the housing activists here in Salem who were coming together to fight this privatization here. And we saw that they had come and talked to some reporters, and so we just got in contact and we came over. We had a meeting. We were able to meet some of the residents here, and there's a number of activists from all around the city who have been working together for a number of years, actually fighting all of these different developments that are going on around. Basically like Kim Driscoll, who she's now the lieutenant governor. For a while, she was the mayor of Boston, and she was also she was on the board of directors of the Salem Housing Authority. And that's actually a conflict of interest. You're not supposed to be a mayor and board of directors of the Housing Authority at the same time, but it was the governor, was it Charlie?
Baker?
Yeah, Baker, he overrode the conflict of interest so that, she could be on it. And she obviously, like all these politicians, has a lot of different relationships with developers. And, worked together with Beacon, which is the developer that's taking over here, to make an arrangement to sell off this land, it's a pretty old 40-unit development here for elderly and disabled people. A lot of them are veterans. They've lived here their whole lives, right on the waterfront. And they're going to tear it down and put up a new building that they call, replacement affordable housing, but actually, it's not going to be public housing anymore, and it's going to be under private ownership, probably, funded by banks in a lot of different ways. And one other thing that they've done here just in the last 6 months was they passed it's called a TIF zone of tax increment financing, where basically they said, we're going to create a whole zone of this whole residential neighborhood. We're going to say that because it has a school and like a corner store and a power plant, that it's a commercial area. And so we're going to pass so that any developer who comes here will get they will pay no property taxes for the first 15 years of being here. So basically the developer that's coming in here, that's buying up this public housing, pushing all these elderly people out of their homes and putting up their own building, they're going to get a $3 million tax break from the city of Salem.
So one of the things I do just want to say, like you may not be able to see it behind me, but there is a school over here as well. There's also a tank, which is really random, next to the playground of the school as well. Just really odd and bizarre to me. But obviously, like, these people have lived here for quite some time. You said most of the residents are elderly?
Yep. Yeah, elderly and disabled.
Is it illegal to force tenants to vacate the premises, and why or why not?
So I'm not a lawyer. I definitely think it should be illegal. But, unfortunately in the last 10, 15 years, Congress and the Department of Housing and Urban Development and, all the different presidents, Obama, Trump, Bush, they all work together to create new regulations that, allow them to do this to public housing. To privatize it, to relocate people out of it, to take them to court if they refuse to go. And so, I don't know, it may be possible that those laws they've set up are themselves illegal, but then also, when they come in and do it, they often are breaking a lot of the regulations of how that's even supposed to be done when they do it. They're supposed to have public meetings with the people who live here, the people in the neighborhood, to actually discuss what's going on. And they don't really do that. Some of the activists here from Salem, when they tried to come to one of those meetings, they had the cops called on them. It's unfortunate, but it's also difficult because there's not a lot of pro bono lawyers who are willing to take this stuff on right now because, they just kind of say, oh, it's affordable housing.
Right, but the privatizing of development. So we're doing this to let you know that this is not just a problem in Boston. It's not just a problem in New York City. We're in Salem, Massachusetts, which is north of Boston. It's referred to mainly as a commuter town. A lot of people will live here because the rent is somewhat cheaper than Boston, and they'll take the commuter rail into Boston to work. But the privatization of these developments has also been happening in places like Salem and places like Springfield, Massachusetts. So it's not just unique to Boston. There needs to be something to put these kind of, rules like in check so that these developers are not able to continue to do this. What happens if these tenants financially cannot afford to move out and find another place to live?
Well, so if I think they kind of hope to some degree that a lot of people will just leave of their own accord and exit the subsidized housing system. But if they don't, then, they just have to go along with whatever they get handed. We've seen in Boston, I don't know exactly how things will play out here, but in Boston, when people have been relocated, they get a notice 6 months in advance, and then suddenly, a couple weeks ahead, suddenly people start knocking on their door. And they say, you need to move in 2 weeks. Start packing up your things. Here's a bunch of boxes. And then they bring you into meetings. They show you some options of housing. And if you say, they try to pressure you to take the apartments. A lot of times they'll move you miles away from where you've lived for years, and you don't have the option to refuse it. A lot of times, and then they try to take that opportunity to push people out of the public housing system entirely. Say, if you just take a Section 8 voucher, then it'll make things a lot easier. I think, like you said, it's important to see it's not just in these small cities, it's these government run housing. It's very small housing authorities are being dismantled all across the entire country. And what does that mean too? It's that all of the the ownership, the running of housing that is even mildly affordable is now all dependent on the profits of a number of very large banks who are bankrolling this stuff, financing it, hiring companies out that manage the properties. And so now, let's say we have a bank crisis, which we're going to have a bank crisis pretty soon. Yep. Then, suddenly the question of whether people are going to continue to have housing that's run properly, that's not just sold off again or just let to deteriorate, is now dependent on, whether these banks can stay afloat. And so I think we're going to see, as this stuff escalates, a lot more government subsidies being given out to the banks and to these developers and stuff to say, we need to do it for them to keep even being able to run the housing. So I think it's just another important thing for us to be looking at is it seems like there's going to be a real estate crisis developing pretty soon.
Yeah, this is giving me 2008 vibes when we had the housing crisis. Of course, for people who are not aware, those homes that were foreclosed, BlackRock actually bought a lot of those homes. They renovated those homes and increased the price. And honestly, they're still doing that today, by the way. They're still purchasing homes and renovating them and increasing them. And that's part of the reason why you can't afford to buy a single family home right now. So we have these companies like BlackRock, we have these banks that are invested, and there needs to be some type of limitation preventing these companies and these banks from coming in to take over ownership of these developments. Otherwise, this is gentrification times 200, because people are being pushed further and further out, regardless of if this is their home for years and they work here or not. But Gabe, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And just to add one thing to what you're saying, when they take over these buildings, they say they have a clause in their contracts that say, we're going to run this as affordable housing for 15, 20, 25 years. And then once that contract is up, we get to decide if we want to renew it. And if it's not financially feasible to keep running the housing based on whatever we say financially feasible, then we can take it out of affordable housing. And so what all these government agencies are telling us is, just trust us. We're going to make sure that we keep renewing these contracts. But like you said, it's just, they're building a house out of cards, and, we have to fight back against it.
Thanks so much, Gabe.
Thank you.
All right. I am here with Leslie. She is a resident of this area as well. Leslie, what is your take on what's happening with this development?
So this development, they started having meetings during COVID. I think they have been doing this for a while, but we were starting to get informed during COVID. So all these meetings about what was going to happen here happened during COVID, and everything was on Zoom. A lot of the residents here did not have any access to get onto the internet, so they were not able to participate. I joined with a lot of different residents in the area trying to fight what was happening here. I met with Beacon Communities, I've met with city council members, really expressing my concern of what they're doing to the residents, what's happening to the school, what's happening to the community. Nothing was listened to. I tried working on with them about the design, what it should look like, what should happen to the residents, and they kind of ignored everything that I suggested and kept moving forward. Everything has gotten approved. I continue to talk to the residents in this area pretty much weekly about what's going on, become very friendly with them. They voice their concerns, their frustrations, their anxieties, their depression. I actually brought a pastor in to meet with them on Thursdays because they were looking for some guidance because they were so scared and had no idea what was going on. So we do that every Thursday and meet with him. So I can say.
Now, how many, they were basically given notice to vacate the premises in a certain number of days, but I've also heard that some residents were told 120 days, and now some people are being told they have to vacate by July 1st.
Yeah, so they've been getting notices, their eviction notices, and I just talked to one resident the other day. He just got his. It's 120 days, so they're telling him in October. But what he said is that he told them where he wanted to live, and they said, okay, we found you a place, you can move now. And he said, oh, but I don't know if I like it. And so he didn't, and they're like, okay, well, you can start packing, you can get boxes, and we're going to move you to this place in Rosendale. He wanted to move to Rosendale to be closer to his mother. And he said he wasn't ready, he needed to see the place, it was going to be exactly what he needed to move to. And then they also told him, because they didn't provide him with any boxes, that they wouldn't reimburse him if he bought his own boxes. So he asked me if I could keep boxes so he could start packing, because it looks like they're moving him out as soon as possible. So
just imagine like being told that you have to leave your home. Oh, and by the way, this is the home that we found for you. You don't really get to come look at it or anything like that. It's just, this is your home. Here you go. Go ahead and start moving now. What do you think is the development that purchased this property? What is the plan to turn this into affordable housing? Is that the plan?
10% will be affordable housing, and then the rest, I think, is going to be a market value for rent. So they're trying to make it like it won't be super expensive, but I mean it's higher than anyone can afford here. So they say that all the residents are going to be able to come back, but if you actually think about it, 2 years, they're going to be gone for 2 years, already moved, settle into a new home, and then they get to come back. A lot of people are not going to do that. They're older, they're disabled. I've talked to plenty of them, and they said, you know, this has been their home for 30 years. Now they're going to move. They're really going to move and then come back again. It's just too hard for them. They're old, they're disabled. So they're definitely, I know a lot of them probably will not come back. And what I've heard from them is the depression and the sadness. They said, you know, this is their home, 30 years, 40 years, 20 years. This is where they've lived. This is where they have a community. This is their neighborhood. And now they're just being forced to, they have to pick a new place. They're like, where do you want to live? Beverly, Lynn, Salem. And they're like, I don't know. And, you know, they're just picking any place, and Beacon Communities and Salem Housing Authority is just pushing them wherever they want to and not really giving them an option of where they're going.
Now, you said you met with City Council. I'm curious in reference to representatives in Congress. This is Seth Moulton's district, correct?
Yes, and I don't think he has been involved at all. I met with our Ward 1 person. I don't know if I'm allowed to say names. And he had no idea when this was first happening, what I was talking about. And then when I finally tried to talk to him again, he had no idea what the plans were, and he would call me back, and then he never called me back. And I think when we went to all these meetings, this was pretty much a done deal. All the city councilors had it approved. They didn't want to listen to us. So I think no matter what was going to happen, they had this pretty much all set up.
So this is one of the things I continue to stress to people, that it's important that you know who your city councilors are. City council controls the budget. So they do have meetings that you are allowed to attend. I've been to some of these myself. They're open to the public, but you actually have to attend them. Not everyone can do that, but some cities will actually take those minutes from that meeting and they'll put them up on the city's website so you can see what was discussed during those meetings. But this is important, why you need to pay attention to local government. Who's in city council? Who is your representative? Seth Moulton is the representative here. He seems to not be as involved. That's not a surprise to me, but you have to hold people accountable. Now, one of the other issues that's been brought up is the environmental concern for this particular area. So I've been told that this area may be underwater in the next couple of years. So is it even worth it to build something new here? And the developers that are coming in, have they made that clear, like, to the residents that live here as well?
Not that I heard of. We have voiced our concern about this being a flood zone, and it was actually really interesting because when we went to the city council meetings, they kept saying, and Beacon Community kept saying, well, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that nothing floods. And then there was a meeting over at the Bentley School over there with another group that was part of the city, looking at all the water, the wetlands and everything around here. And they said in 70 years, pretty much all of this area is going to be underwater. So then there was a big discussion, and they made us shut up at the meeting, that we said, well, why are you building brand new condos here if it's all going to be underwater? They showed maps, and I live right there, that this is all going to be underwater. And we kept saying, well, why are you spending $69 million? And they said, no, we're not going to discuss that here. We want to talk about other initiatives that we can do in this area. And it's just, Beacon Community keeps saying, well, we've looked at everything, we've talked to everyone that's involved with the wetlands and flooding, and we're going to be fine. This road floods all the time. I don't know what they're going to do. But Beacon Community, again, has their own agenda. They have not been helpful. They haven't listened. They haven't been helpful to the residents here. They have these meetings and no one shows up to them. I've met with them personally probably 10 or 12 times, voicing concerns, never listened to any concerns. So it's just been really hard and sad what's going on.
Yeah, so for those who, you can't tell where I'm standing, but we are right next to the water. So if I were to walk over that way, you would be able to see it, that obviously this is going to be an issue in reference to climate change. So Leslie, I appreciate the fact that you have tried to talk to city councilors, local representatives, to explain your frustration about this issue. One of the things that I have noticed is that this has been a huge deal in places like Boston, but I'm noticing it is starting to spread. Here we are now in Salem, Massachusetts. So it's not just a problem for the metropolitan areas. It's also a problem for a place like Salem, which is nowhere near as large as Boston. Do you see this more as an effect of gentrification as well, or do you feel like this is a separate issue?
No, I feel like it's an effect of gentrification. I think this is waterfront property, and they're looking at all waterfront property to see what they can build. And even though they keep saying it's affordable housing, they're offering maybe 10% affordable housing. This is going to be 5 stories of condos overlooking the water. And there's also other places owned by Salem Housing Authority that are on the water that they're looking to make into condos over by Salem State. So there are so many other places that they could have built, and it's fine. But yeah, this is just waterfront property gentrification and getting people out of here. And that's what it seems like Salem is doing. They're not worrying about the residents. They're not worrying about the traffic that's going to happen. I mean, they're shutting down this whole road, and it's just going to be, like a cul-de-sac. The traffic, I've talked to them, is going to be ridiculous around here. And as long as they get more money coming in and higher rents for condos, they don't care.
Well, Leslie, thank you so much.
You're welcome. It's nice talking to you. Thank you.
All right, I'm here with Sol. She is a resident here in Massachusetts. Sol, so I know that you're a resident here in Salem, Massachusetts. You grew up here. I want to tap into the Salem Housing Authority because I haven't had a chance to touch on that yet. Some people would assume that in these types of situations, you can contact the Housing Authority and that's where they would step in and protect the residents. Is that the case, yes or no?
Unfortunately, Sabby, that's it's sad to say because I grew up in the housing projects, Rainbow Terrace, which is about maybe 5 or 6 minutes away from here. Unfortunately, they don't. I mean, they have a tenants association, but it's very much like bureaucratic, red tape, and it really doesn't. They don't protect the residents or the tenants, in my opinion. That's just been my experience. So if you're looking to reach out for help or trying to find an answer, it's like, you can call HUD or you can call this person, you can call that person, and then you leave a voicemail and you're waiting for like weeks, months, and it's like, people need a secure home to live in. They need to know that the people that are supposed to be looking out for their best interests are in fact looking out for their best interests, and unfortunately that has not been the case. So yeah, that's where we're at. That's what it's been for many years, unfortunately. Like the neighborhood I grew up in as well, again, another Salem housing managed property, they took down the playground that was there for many, many years. Don't know why. They didn't really tell anybody. So there's no place for those kids to play. And this is a neighborhood that has been housing low income and veterans families for many, many years. And so it's like, where are these kids supposed to play? And they have a basketball court. Okay, let me put my 2-year-old on the basketball court. So it's just like, yeah, my eyes are like watering because it's just super. I get emotional about this sort of thing because it's very close to my heart. And even though, again, I don't live in that neighborhood at the moment, it's something that definitely still just like tugs at my heartstrings because there's kids that do live there and they do deserve a place to play. And then again, circling back to this neighborhood, it's just been a lot of like, how do I put it? Like, when COVID happened, they went to Zoom meetings and everything. And unfortunately, the way that the city of Salem, the current leadership and leadership for the past, almost 2 decades, has not been very transparent. Not necessarily not illegal things, but to me, I would consider sort of towing the line of unethical, just because it's like, it's not fair that you leave the most vulnerable in your city sort of just out to, hanging them out to dry, while you're having just, how do I put it? Just in the situation, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. It's just the tale as old as time, right? So that's just been the situation for a long time. And I know that, the area of median income in this particular city of Salem has gone up, which is amazing. That's great. Property values go up. That's awesome. But what about the folks that are working 2 or 3 jobs and their rent goes up? And they, so many people that I know that I've grown up with, they've had to move to out of state and just or within the state, but just so far away, and then they're far from their family and everything like that. But that's just what you do to survive. And I know it's happening everywhere, gentrification, right? But I really think that it's interesting to see that now that the governor and lieutenant governor are talking about housing and this and that, and they're really looking more towards building things. We don't need to build anything else. I was talking to someone just a little while ago. I was in the car with my kids and we bumped into a coyote, and it's like, they're like, what is that? I'm like, well, that's what happens when you knock down all the trees and you keep interfering with nature. Where are these animals supposed to go? And it's like, and then they want to again continue building. There's another issue here down at Shetland Park. I think a company from New York, or a corporation from New York, just purchased it, and that's right near the water, and they're talking about developing that. And I'm like, guys, we're gonna end up in the ocean. Yeah. It's just a lot. It's just so much, and I don't mean to I feel like I'm maybe ranting a bit, but there's just so much that has been this sort of ties into all of this, and it really boils down to where the leadership has been for the past few decades, and then people such as myself. I'm a Latina, born and raised again in Salem, Mass. Very close ties to Latin American neighborhood, El Punto, the Point, and back in the 80s it was predominantly a French neighborhood, but sort of phased into Dominican, Puerto Rican, sort of Caribbean, Central American folks. And that's been a neighborhood where people started out with, and a lot of people that came from that neighborhood have become doctors, lawyers, nurses, teachers, musicians, artists, just, citizens, like fully functioning citizens, and just amazing people. And that's another neighborhood that's being affected by sort of all of this like change and things like that. You have the murals that went up some time ago, which when you talk about gentrification, right, those are corporate markers. And it's like, oh, this is a nice neighborhood, we would love to live here. And it's just like rent goes skyrocketing. And then there's a building there on Peabody Street that used to be an empty lot where we used to have block parties, and the neighborhood would come and everybody would it would be a great time. And then when it wasn't being used for community space, it was also a parking lot, which the city of Salem has an issue with parking. So there's just like constant, just like things building up. And again, they want to continue building and creating. I understand the need for creating housing for people, but I feel like we need to really be intentional about focusing on, making sure that we don't leave people behind. You know what I'm saying? Because it's just, I don't know. There's a lot of work to be done, and I'm hoping that things change. That's my thing. Like, I don't want to just sit, complain. That's why I'm here today, to sort of speak up on several issues that I know and that I've been experiencing and witnessing, because things need to change. Like, it's too much.
I will say too, all up and down like Eastern Massachusetts, which is where Boston is located, there has been this shift from communities that were particularly working class communities many years ago, immigrant families that lived in those communities and developed those communities. Those neighborhoods have now shifted to neighborhoods that basically are affordable for the professional managerial class. And that's what's happened. You have these neighborhoods that are on the waterfront. East Boston is another one where they're trying to gentrify. All of these neighborhoods that developers looked at and said, hey, this is actually a nice location. Why don't we buy up these apartment buildings and build luxury condos and turn it into another cookie cutter plaza type resident neighborhood? And that has been happening all along, at least Eastern Massachusetts. That's been happening all along. So what happens is people are pushed further out. Some people have relocated to places like Worcester, Massachusetts, but then now Worcester is starting to get gentrification. So people have moved over to Western Mass, where you have like Springfield and Chicopee, but now those parts are starting to get, so it's just this idea that people should just relocate. That's actually not the solution. And that's what people really need to understand. So the representatives, the city councils, they're bought in by the developers. So they're actually part of the problem. You think they should represent you. They're supposed to, but they don't. So they're part of the problem. So what you have is even a town like Salem, which when I moved to Massachusetts 11 years ago, it was definitely much more affordable. But what has happened is, again, people have started to relocate, bought homes here, people who could afford to buy them. And now Salem is like, okay, this is a profitable commuter town and we can build it up to be so much more. What does that do to people like Sol, who grew up here her whole life? So these are the kind of things that we need to look at. And the fact that these residents here are being pushed out, that they're told 120 days you have to leave. Like, this is just crazy to me. Like, I don't understand how they expect people to just up and leave their home and just go live somewhere else in a neighborhood where they don't know anybody, they don't know anyone in the community. And I want to get your perspective for someone who is Latina. What happens to the people who have grown up in some of these neighborhoods and they're pushed out? And let's say that they communicate with the people in their neighborhood, and let's say they only know Spanish, for example. So I worked with students where their parents did not speak English. Now they're pushed into a community where, let's say the people there don't speak the language. Like, what happens to those people?
That's a great question. So they just get by. They struggle, they get by, and it's just like, what else can you do, And I know for a fact that there are instances where, even when, if you do something as simple as, going to a doctor's appointment and things like that, thank goodness now we have, interpreters and things like that. But even just sometimes just getting there, what if people don't drive, they don't have their license because, again, the language barrier or whatever the case may be. And it's like, I know sometimes there's a lot of discourse. Oh, just learn English, whatever. It's like, it's not that simple. First of all, English is a really hard language to learn. Okay, it's a very hard language. If it's not your first,
One of the hardest.
one of the hardest language. Yeah. So it's just, it's just really frustrating. And, and the fact that they told them that they have 120 days to get out of there is just insane. I mean, it's just, like I said, that the city and the leadership here just doesn't care about the people. Like, there was an instance at Forest River Park last summer where they were doing cheerleading for Pop Warner. I think it was Pop Warner. I'm not sure if it was, but anyways, it was a cheerleading camp for girls, right? Or children, I should say, because they're boys too. And non-binary children. And so kids were having cheer practice, going about their business, and it was not even nighttime. It was like 5. Somebody called the police to complain about the noise in a public park. A public park. I'm like, are you serious? And then they're not allowed to practice there anymore. That was it. They shut it down. I'm like, they've been practicing there for years. And I think the park that they were at before or something like that is just like deemed like toxic. Like the dirt is deemed toxic, and that's been sitting. That was like, I think that's what is it? I'm drawing Gallows Hill Park. There's just like they're fixing it allegedly. We don't know, but just stuff like that. Like just again, it's just they keep displacing people, whether it be from community spaces or from their homes, or and it's just like it's just not fair. It's just not fair, and something has to be done.
That's right. Well, Sol, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sabby. I appreciate your time.
I'm here with a resident from Lee Fort Terrace. For safety reasons, we are not going to show their face, but you will hear their voice. So from what I understand, they're giving you 120 days to vacate the premises, correct?
Yes, they are. But I wonder if they're vacating their premises. There have been papers that go back, years about the age bracket and the infirmities and the veteran situation and the type of stress that evolves into terror. And we've already had one person who died in a heart attack, and the average is about 2.5 people. I hope I'm not the 0.5 that'll perish. So there's at least 2 more people that'll perish because of the stress about the force moving. The other communities of Beverly and Ipswich that have the same type of architecture, this configuration, showing respect, for the veteran and the infirmed and the elderly, and they're moving one out, rehabbing and moving them back. Here they're doing a massive move and moving a satellite community out in a forced movement situation. The majority of people don't want to move, and a lot of people are in fear. So I don't know if it's right to have a lot of aged, elderly, and veterans in fear. And part of the situation is economic discrimination, because there isn't the ability to have a lawyer. So if there's a lawyer out there who actually cares, this thing ends up in federal court. It's Salem, Massachusetts. And the biggest question in this community seems to be, where did the money come from a right-wing national super PAC financed primarily by national real estate developers to finance a mayor on her television ads? And it also seems to look like that the super PAC is tied into Mitch McConnell.
So you're saying, really quick, you're saying there's a super PAC attached to all this as well?
Yes, the super PAC is attached to the ambitions and the election of the current lieutenant governor and former mayor, Kim Driscoll. It would be nice to find out how a left-wing mayor, a bedroom community of 40,000 with an average income of 40,000, managed to hook up with a national right-wing super PAC tied into Mitch McConnell. And it was in the Globe, went in the primaries, in the Metro section, and it was in the Boston Globe on the front page below the fold before the election. It remained opaque of how she got engaged with these people that put 7 figures in television ads that got her there. And, you know, in politics, you know, we're talking about someone that's 57 years old, an attorney, bare naked ambition, that's willing to step on old, elderly, and veterans in order to get what she wants. What's next?
So again, you have Republicans and Democrats working together when it comes to special interests and when it comes to finances, when it comes to money. Are you? Yeah.
It's all about the money. There is no Democrats, there is no Republicans, there's only Greencrats. Who's getting the money, how much, how fast, at all costs.
Well said. Are you prepared to move? And if so, do you know where you're going to go?
I've been trying to turn my paperwork three times. I've been having difficulty trying to turn it in, which is one of the reasons my face isn't on this, because I have no idea what's going on. And the way it seems to be looking out when I look at the paperwork, they want us to find our own place to live, us to put up the money in order to get in there, and send them the receipt. Yeah, these people are all making 6 figures. How did all that work?
Yeah, so for those who are not aware, like obviously this is unjust. It should not be on the tenants to figure out where they're going to go. They should not have to pay for this, is the way that I see it. Has anyone from this community reached out to see if they can contact any type of legal advice?
Yeah, it doesn't go anywhere. And as far as justice is concerned, you have to understand that this is public servants allegedly using public assets for personal gain. And justice in this case means just us.
Well said. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, I hope I can survive this moment.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm here with Tia. She's an organizer for United Front Against Displacement. Tia, thank you so much for joining. So I know that you are familiar with what is happening with the residents here in Salem, Massachusetts, because I know that we've talked about this before, you had to deal with issues at your current residence at Bromley Heath, and how the city has just brought investors in to try to privatize these developments. What has been the general response that you've received? I know that you've reached out to Mayor Michelle Wu in reference to Boston, and do you think that there should be some type of legal advice that comes in for these tenants as well?
Yes, well, first, thank you for having me. And yeah, as far as kind of like the type of legal advice that can be happening, like one of the things with when we basically went through kind of like the neighborhoods, that there's a lot of basically, kind of like, that there's basically not a lot of information being given to the tenants. Basically, there are some tenants that don't even speak English that haven't been made aware of any of these things. So it's kind of like, how can I say this? It's basically just kind of like they're basically being left in the lurch, and there's, not too many people kind of giving them and basically keeping them aware, or basically even letting them know exactly where they should go. So as far as kind of like legal advice, well, for a lot of these people, they're kind of like like I said, they're either non-English speakers, or a lot of them are elderly disabled. So it's kind of like not too many people are basically, letting them know about kind of like what their rights are in this situation.
Right. And this is a big part of the problem, is a lot of times tenants just don't know their rights. I've seen this across the board, regardless of which neighborhood or state I've lived in. People just don't know. And I would be interested to see if there are lawyers that do specialize in this particular issue, so that they can prevent these tenants from being pushed out. So we're trying to spread the message about this to get more people aware that it's happening. Again, it's not just happening in Boston. You see it's happening in places like Salem. Is happening all across the country. Yes. So we have to bring more awareness to it, and I think that's one of the steps in the right direction. I mean, what would you do? What would you do if you were told you have to just leave now?
yeah, we've actually seen that because over at Bromley, where I currently live, they kind of told the tenants who were basically still within those buildings that they had less than a week to move out, and some of them hadn't even been shown proper housing yet. So we had to literally hold a rally, do protests and everything right there in order to basically just buy them some time. So it's kind of like, as far as kind of like the people will go, it's basically like just making some kind of a fuss and basically making it where other people know about it is a step. But as far as kind of like as you were saying, it would be, I would hope that basically that there is like lawyers and other people who do know the legal system, who basically do know how to really come at these housing authorities and everything, who are basically more interested in basically privatizing the area and getting their money than they are about the tenants, that there is somebody who can help them.
All right, Tia, thank you so much.
No, thank you very much, Sabby.
All right. So we're going to take a walk around the complex to show you what it looks like, and then you'll be able to see why they want this property so bad.
Yeah. So this, just so you know, it was built in 1950, and there's 50 homes here for all elderly and disabled housing.
So this was built in 1950?
Yes. Owned by the Salem Housing Authority, and it is private property, they say, but a lot of families and residents were cut through here. It's a nice community. People are saying hi. You see people walking dogs, kids riding bikes to school. So these definitely need to be upgraded. When I talked to the residents, I think a couple months ago, it takes them a lot to get something fixed in their apartment. So toilets to get fixed can take months. Molds, I've heard, there's rats. So they definitely need to be upgraded. But I think Salem Housing Authority needs to do a lot more for these residents instead of just knocking it down, saying people are going to come back. And
Eric, there's Salem Housing Authority right there.
Yeah.
So there's that.
Yeah. But you're going to come up to where you'll see that this comes over to the water, and they're going to build waterfront property. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think this is what people need to see because people don't realize, like, I think for a long time, like places like Salem and Ipswich and maybe even East Boston were kind of like these hidden gems because they had that waterfront access.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I actually was driving through Revere yesterday, Revere Beach, and I see these cute little houses right on the beach. And I'm like, I bet developers would love to take those and make those into condos.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Most definitely.
Yeah.
They flood. They have flooding there, too.
Yep.
But this is absolutely beautiful, and this is what they want.
This is what they want. They're saying that this is going to be 10% affordable housing and then a market value rate of rent, which I can send you all the information. People are saying that low income people will not be able to afford this. But yeah, this is, Collins Cove. This is beautiful. It's quiet. It's all families. There's a school right here, which they're going to disrupt the learning for 2 years with the school. I've already talked to them about that. They said, Beacon Community said that if there's a test going on at the school, they'll stop construction. It's K through 5th grade, so they're going to stop all the time for tests. So they're going to be disrupting all learning at the school. They don't care about that. But yeah, it's so they can have this beautiful waterfront property.
Look at this. Mm-hmm. So this is something like, these communities, and I've said this before, like Salem, Beverly, but at Beverly also, Salem, Beverly, Gloucester, they have like this waterfront access. You'll see there's boats over there. Mm-hmm. It's very pretty and very beautiful, and developers have realized that.
Yes, and that's where people want to live. They want waterfront property. So, if you think about how it looks now, that's going to be 5 stories high. All these trees are going to be cut down. And the most expensive apartments or condos will be looking over at the water. So, and I mean, I just feel bad for these residents that they keep promising that they're going to be able to come back. I don't even know what kind of apartments they would get. They probably wouldn't get the high quality apartments. They would get the low quality apartments.
Some of the affordable housing units that I've seen before in Boston, if you look on the city's website, they're like $4,000 for it, and that's considered affordable housing. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, that is not affordable housing. These people are not going to be able to afford any of this. So, yeah.
Wow, wow, wow.
And this is just one of the properties that the city council is looking at, the mayor, Salem Housing Authority, Beacon Communities. There's other waterfront property just like this all over Salem that they're looking to build more and more condos.
And for those who are not aware, Salem also, we call it like commuter town because there's also the Salem stop on the commuter rail. So it's easy access into Boston. So that's another thing that they can use to sell investors on in reference to Salem, that you have that access to public transportation.
And they have said that it's easy to, I mean, yes, it is. You could walk to the train. It's not super easy. It's not something, I mean, I take the train into Boston because I work in Boston, and I get dropped off because it's not it's a longer walk. It'd probably take you like a half an hour. But they're like, oh, people can walk to the train and walk home, and yeah. So.
And not unless you live downtown.
Not unless you live downtown, yes. So, yes, they're looking to build right here, yeah?
Oh my, how things have changed. So you've heard today from tenants and from activists and organizers in reference to what's happening at Lee Fort Terrace here in Salem, Massachusetts. And one of the things that was brought to my attention, I think people should be aware of, even though tenants here may have been notified that there were meetings that were going to happen in reference to them vacating the premises, it appears that this type of communication, according to the company, is that it was done via Zoom. And it was brought to my attention recently by one of the residents that most of the residents here don't have a computer and don't even have an email address. So again, I think this speaks to a certain type of economical, issue. Obviously, this assumption that everyone has a computer, that everyone has an email address, that everyone has access to the internet, that is a class issue. And so I think people need to understand that it would have just been just as easy to put a flyer in everyone's mailbox to let them know we're getting together to have a meeting to discuss what's going to happen. Now, that doesn't make it right what they're trying to do to these tenants. I don't think that should happen at all. But it does point to a class issue here, the assumption that everybody has access to these tools of technology. And in reality, everyone does not.